The terminal buzzed with life, a chaotic symphony of voices, announcements, and the steady hum of rolling suitcases on polished tile. Travelers hurried from one gate to another, their conversations blending into an indistinct murmur. Flight delays, last-minute gate changes, and lost luggage complaints filled the air, but Colonel David Carter barely noticed. He had a different mission, one that weighed heavier than the ribbons on his chest. Dressed in his formal Army service uniform, Carter walked with measured steps, his polished shoes clicking rhythmically against the floor. His presence commanded quiet respect. Some passengers noticed the deep-set lines on his face, the stoic expression, the rigid posture of a man who had seen too much. But most were too absorbed in their own world to pay him any attention. That was fine. He wasn't here for recognition. He was here for Private First Class Jason Reynolds, 21 years old. Gone too soon. The casket was already waiting on the tarmac, draped in the American flag, a stark contrast to the bright morning sky. The sight of it would have been unbearable for the soldiers' parents, who were still in shock. But Carter had made a promise. To Jason, to his family, to the uniform he had dedicated his life to. No one gets left behind. A sharp breath in. A slow exhale. Focus. This wasn't about him. This was about duty. He approached the airline counter, sliding his military ID and travel orders across the desk to the young woman behind it. She was too preoccupied to immediately register who she was dealing with. "One moment, sir." Her fingers flew over the keyboard, tapping out the necessary details. Then she stopped. The hesitation was slight, half a second, maybe less, but Carter noticed. The shift in posture, the sideways glance toward her coworker, the small, almost imperceptible flicker of discomfort in her eyes. "Sir, can I see that again?" Carter nodded, keeping his voice level. "Of course." She took the papers again, but something in her demeanor had changed. There was tension now. A silent conversation passed between her and the agent beside her. A whisper, a quick shake of the head. Carter's instincts flared. He had seen this kind of reaction before, in places far from home, where red tape was used as a weapon rather than a safeguard. The woman turned back to him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm sorry, sir, but there's an issue with your ticket." Carter remained still. "What kind of issue?" A pause. A moment of uncertainty. Then, the response. "We can't allow you to board at this time." Silence stretched between them. Carter let the words settle, choosing his next move carefully. He had faced enemy fire, insurgents, even the convoluted bureaucracy of the Pentagon. But this felt different. This was personal. "I'm escorting the remains of a fallen soldier," Carter said, tapping the paperwork with measured control. "Everything is in order." The woman's gaze faltered. "I understand, sir, but there's a security protocol in place." "Security protocol?" "Yes, sir." Her voice was strained now, as if she, too, wasn't entirely convinced by what she was saying. "It's just policy." Carter's jaw tightened. Policy. The word was a shield. A wall. A convenient excuse to deny something they didn't want to explain. Behind him, the line grew. People shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension. Some tried not to stare, but others weren't so discreet. Whispers started. Who was this soldier? What was happening? A man a few spots back cleared his throat. "Sir, do you have an issue with his military clearance?" Carter turned his head slightly. The voice belonged to a Marine, his weathered face framed by a worn USMC cap. His sharp gaze locked onto the airline staff with unwavering suspicion. The agent hesitated. "No, sir, this isn't about clearance. It's just standard protocol." The Marine folded his arms. "Yeah, I've been through security 1,000 times, and I've never seen protocol stop a soldier from escorting one of our own home." He took a step forward. "So what is it?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. A ripple of energy passed through the crowd. Phones were raised. People started recording. Someone muttered, "This doesn't seem right." Then a voice, clear, unafraid, cut through the growing noise. "I don't mean to intrude," a young woman said, stepping forward, "but I just want to make sure I understand. They're not letting you board." She turned her phone screen toward him. She was live, streaming, thousands watching. The airline staff shifted uncomfortably. "Sir," the supervisor said hastily, stepping in, "I apologize for the inconvenience. We're looking into the situation." Another murmur in the crowd. They had been caught. More phones lifted. More voices joined in. The Marine smirked. You really don't know what kind of storm you just started. The airport speakers crackled overhead. Attention passengers. Due to unforeseen circumstances, Flight 237 to Phoenix will be delayed. No one cared. All eyes were on Carter. On this moment. Then, the final shift. A man in a Navy suit approached briskly. His airline ID gleamed, his expression unreadable as he scanned the situation. The cameras. The crowd. Carter's unwavering stance. "Colonel," he said crisply, "I apologize for the miscommunication. There was an error with our system. We're working to get you on your flight immediately." Carter met his gaze. Miscommunication. He knew what that really meant. Then, before he could respond, another figure entered. This one wasn't airline staff. His posture was rigid, authoritative. His ID badge? Military. "Colonel Carter," the man said, voice firm. "I'm Major Thomas Beckett, Department of the Army. We've been informed of the situation." Carter shook his hand. He didn't need to ask how the major had arrived so quickly. The military doesn't play when it comes to its own. Beckett turned to the airline rep. "We are handling this now. Colonel Carter and the remains of Private First Class Reynolds will not be flying commercial." The rep blinked. "Sir, we..." Beckett didn't let him finish. "The Pentagon has arranged for a private military flight. His transport is waiting." The weight in Carter's chest finally eased, not out of relief, but because the mission was back on track. He turned to the Marine. "Appreciate you, brother." The Marine nodded. "We look out for our own." As Carter walked away, he wasn't just leaving the airport. He was walking into something bigger. But for the airline, the fallout was just beginning. The cabin lights flickered as the aircraft cruised through the night sky. Colonel Carter sat stiffly in his seat, eyes scanning the rows of passengers ahead of him. Something felt off. He wasn't a man prone to paranoia, but years of military service had sharpened his instincts, and right now, those instincts were screaming at him. The airline had backtracked on their refusal to let him board, but it had taken far too much pressure. And now, as he settled into the flight, he couldn't shake the sensation that he was being watched. A man 3 rows ahead of him shifted in his seat, his posture too rigid for a casual traveler. Another, seated across the aisle, kept glancing at Carter in quick, darting looks before pretending to focus on the in-flight magazine. Both men were dressed in civilian clothes, but their presence felt manufactured, like they had been placed there with purpose. Carter wasn't the only one who had noticed. An elderly woman sitting beside him leaned in slightly and whispered, "You have a tail." He turned to her, surprised by her directness. She didn't meet his gaze, keeping her eyes on her knitting. "2 men. Watching you. They boarded last minute." Carter exhaled slowly. He wasn't imagining it. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. She smirked. "I was CIA, retire now. But I know the look of an operation in motion." Carter nodded slightly. "Any idea what they want?" The woman shrugged. "They're waiting for something. A signal, maybe." As if on cue, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing unexpected turbulence. Please remain in your seats with seatbelts fastened." The plane trembled slightly. Carter had flown through worse, but the announcement didn't sit right. He stole another glance at the 2 men. One of them was subtly adjusting something under his jacket. A holster. Something was about to happen. Then, the lights cut out. The cabin plunged into darkness, and gasps filled the air. The seatbelt sign flickered erratically, and the turbulence grew more violent. Carter's gut clenched. This wasn't just bad weather. A sharp, metallic click echoed from the front of the plane. Then a voice rang out, steady and commanding. "Nobody move." Carter turned his head toward the source of the voice. A 3rd man, previously unnoticed, now stood near the cockpit door, a firearm glinting in his hand. The hijacking had begun. Screams erupted as passengers ducked in their seats. The 2 men Carter had been watching earlier now stood, revealing their own weapons. One of them turned and locked eyes with Carter. "We know who you are, Colonel," the man sneered. "And you're coming with us." Carter's mind worked fast. The plane was midair, and these men had taken control. But their mistake? They had underestimated him. With practiced precision, he reached under his seat, feeling for anything he could use. His fingers found the heavy buckle of his belt. Improvised weapon. It would have to do. He moved fast, uncoiling like a spring. In one fluid motion, he swung the metal buckle toward the nearest attacker's face. The impact was brutal, bone crunched, and the man staggered back, clutching his bleeding nose. Chaos erupted. The second hijacker turned his gun toward Carter, but the retired CIA woman beside him was faster. She grabbed a tray from the seat pocket and smashed it into the man's arm, sending the gun clattering to the floor. The passengers screamed as the plane jerked violently. The lead hijacker shouted something in a foreign language, trying to regain control. Carter dove for the loose firearm. The moment his fingers wrapped around the grip, he rolled behind his seat, using it as cover. The first hijacker, still clutching his broken nose, reached for his weapon, but Carter was faster. One well-aimed shot to the shoulder, and the man went down with a howl of pain. The cabin was in total panic. The lead hijacker realized he was losing control. Desperation flickered across his face as he grabbed a flight attendant and pressed his gun against her temple. "Drop your weapon, Colonel, or she dies." Carter's heartbeat thundered. He assessed the angle, the distance, the probability of success. He needed a distraction. And then he heard it. A whisper from the CIA woman. "Trust me." Before Carter could question her, she moved. She grabbed a thermos from her bag and hurled it toward the hijacker's head. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The moment of surprise was all Carter needed. He fired. One precise shot. The hijacker's weapon flew from his hand as he crumpled to the floor. The flight attendant stumbled back, unharmed but shaking. Silence filled the cabin, save for the hum of the engines and the distant sound of someone sobbing. The threat was neutralized. Carter exhaled slowly, lowering his weapon. The CIA woman gave him a small nod. "Not bad," she said. The flight crew rushed forward, securing the downed hijackers. The passengers erupted into murmured conversations, the shock still settling in. Then, the intercom crackled again. "This is your captain. We will be making an emergency landing. Please remain seated." Carter sat back in his seat, heart still pounding. He had started this journey to escort a fallen soldier home. Now, he had just survived an act of war at 30,000 feet, and something told him this wasn't over yet. The cabin was silent except for the hum of the engines. Colonel David Carter sat upright, his mind a battlefield of questions and theories. The earlier confrontation at the airport had been unsettling, but now, mid-flight, an eerie sense of foreboding settled over him like a storm cloud refusing to break. Then, the turbulence hit. The plane jolted violently, shaking like a leaf caught in a storm. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the cabin. Flight attendants clutched onto seats, their reassuring smiles faltering. The overhead compartments rattled, and for a moment, Carter thought one might pop open, sending luggage tumbling down. He instinctively gripped his armrest. Something wasn't right. He'd been in turbulence before, but this felt different, calculated, like a warning. As the plane steadied, Carter noticed a man across the aisle watching him. A cold, unblinking stare. The stranger had the look of someone who wasn't just a passenger, but an observer, waiting for something. Carter held his gaze, unafraid. Then, a voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We apologize for that rough patch. We should be in for a smoother ride ahead." The tension in the cabin eased, but not for Carter. His instincts screamed that this was only the beginning. Minutes passed. Then, without warning, the seatbelt sign flickered on again. A flight attendant hurried down the aisle, whispering something to another crew member before disappearing behind the cockpit door. Passengers exchanged nervous glances. Carter felt the weight of unseen forces moving in the background. Then, the man across the aisle stood up. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a crisp black suit that seemed too formal for a domestic flight. Without a word, he stepped toward the back of the plane, disappearing into the galley. Carter's gut told him to follow. He unbuckled his seatbelt, rising with controlled precision. The moment he stepped into the narrow galley, a strong hand clamped onto his arm. "Colonel Carter," the man said, his voice low and even. "We need to talk." Carter didn't flinch. "Who are you?" The man exhaled, glancing around as if ensuring they were alone. "You've been flagged for a reason. What happened at the airport was not a mistake." Carter's eyes narrowed. "Then start talking." The man reached into his coat, pulling out a small device. He pressed a button, and a faint buzzing sound filled the space. A signal jammer. Whatever was about to be said, they didn't want anyone listening. "You were never supposed to be on this flight," the man said. "There are people who don't want you to complete your mission." Carter felt his pulse quicken. "Who?" The man hesitated, then finally said, "There's something in that casket." A chill ran through Carter's spine. "What are you talking about?" "The soldier you're escorting." Jason Reynolds wasn't just any private first class. He was involved in something classified, something dangerous. His death wasn't an accident. And the body you're escorting, it's carrying more than just memories. Carter's mind raced. He thought back to the security issue at the airport, the hesitation from the airline staff, the turbulence. It wasn't paranoia. It was a setup. "Who are you working for?" Carter asked, his voice cold. The man exhaled. "I'm not your enemy, Colonel. I'm trying to keep you alive. That casket contains evidence that some very powerful people don't want reaching its destination. If you land with it, you might not make it out of that airport alive." Carter squared his shoulders. "I don't abandon my mission." The man nodded, as if he expected that answer. "Then you need to be ready, because it won't stop." Suddenly, the plane jolted again. This time, it wasn't turbulence. A different kind of movement ran through the aircraft, like something shifting in the cargo hold. Carter and the man locked eyes. "They're making their move," the man said. Carter pushed past him, heading straight for the cockpit. Whatever was happening, he needed to be ahead of it. As he reached the first-class curtain, a flight attendant stepped in front of him. "Sir, you need to return to your seat." Carter didn't stop. "Move." Her hand shot out, gripping his wrist. But her grip was wrong. Too strong for a regular flight attendant. Carter didn't hesitate. In one swift motion, he twisted her arm and stepped aside, his military training taking over. The woman grunted in pain, but before she could react, Carter saw it. The glimpse of a concealed weapon beneath her uniform. Adrenaline surged through his veins. This wasn't just an interference. This was an ambush. The weight of everything that had transpired pressed down on Colonel David Carter like an unrelenting storm. The moment he stepped off the plane, he felt the shift in the air. Something had changed. Something irreversible. The media had gotten hold of the story. The flight delay, the confrontation at the airport, the whispers of something bigger happening behind the scenes. It had all exploded into a wildfire of speculation. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions, their voices a chaotic blend of urgency and curiosity. "Colonel Carter, what really happened on that flight?" "Sir, are the security concerns valid? Or is this something bigger? Do you believe you were targeted?" Carter didn't answer. His focus was on the casket being unloaded from the plane, the flag draped over it rippling in the soft evening breeze. Private First Class Jason Reynolds was finally home. That was all that mattered at this moment. He walked alongside the honor guard, his movements precise and deliberate. Every step was a silent tribute to the young soldier who had made the ultimate sacrifice. He could feel the tension in the air, the murmurs of bystanders who had gathered to watch, some recording the solemn procession on their phones. The weight of their eyes, their expectations, their thirst for truth, it all clung to him. As the casket was placed into the hearse, a young reporter broke the silence. "Colonel, we've received anonymous reports that your name was flagged in the system due to an internal government directive. Do you have any comment on that?" Carter froze. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. So, the truth was beginning to leak. He turned to face the crowd, his voice steady but firm. "My mission was to bring Private Reynolds home. That mission is complete. I have nothing more to say at this time." The reporters weren't satisfied, but Carter had learned long ago that some battles weren't fought in the open. Later that night, as Carter sat alone in his hotel room, his phone vibrated with a series of messages. He ignored most of them, concerned colleagues, old friends checking in, but one caught his attention. "Unknown number ***, we need to talk. Meet me at the diner on 5th, midnight. Come alone, ***. His gut twisted. He knew that this wasn't over. The diner was nearly empty when Carter arrived. The flickering neon sign buzzed faintly, casting an eerie glow over the parking lot. He stepped inside, scanning the room. A man sat in the back booth, his face shadowed beneath the brim of a baseball cap. Carter approached cautiously. "You called me." The man gestured for him to sit. "I don't have much time." "Neither do you." Carter slid into the booth, studying him. "Who are you?" The man exhaled sharply. "A friend. A former intelligence analyst." I worked in a division you've probably never heard of. Doesn't matter. What matters is, your name was flagged for a reason. And it wasn't a mistake. Carter leaned forward. Explain. The man glanced around before lowering his voice. They're covering something up. Something big. You weren't supposed to be on that flight, Carter. Someone up the chain tried to ground you because they knew if you made it to Phoenix, you'd start asking the right questions. Carter's pulse quickened. What questions? About what really happened to Private Reynolds. A chill ran through Carter's spine. He was killed in action. That's what the report said. The man shook his head. That's what they want you to believe. But the real story? It's buried so deep, even I barely got a glimpse of it. Carter's grip tightened on the edge of the table. Tell me everything. By the time the man finished speaking, Carter's world had shifted. The official report had been fabricated. Private Reynolds hadn't just died in combat. He had stumbled upon something he wasn't supposed to see. Something that got him killed. A classified operation. A betrayal from within. And now, Carter realized he was caught in the crosshairs. The man slid a USB drive across the table. This is everything I could gather. But be careful, Carter. You expose this, and you'll be making powerful enemies. Carter took the drive, slipping it into his pocket. I don't scare easily. The man smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. I hope for your sake, that's true. Because once you open that file, there's no turning back. Carter spent the next few hours locked in his hotel room, going through the files. The deeper he dug, the worse it got. Corrupt officials, hidden agendas, an entire network of deceit stretching far beyond what he had imagined. It wasn't just about Private Reynolds anymore. This was about something much bigger, something that, if exposed, could shake the very foundation of trust between the military and the people it served. Carter knew he had a choice. He could bury it, pretend he never saw it, walk away and keep his career intact, or he could do what was right and risk everything. He picked up his phone and made a call. I have something you'll want to see. The voice on the other end hesitated. Carter, if this is what I think it is, you're playing a dangerous game. Carter exhaled. Then let's make sure the world is watching. The next morning, Carter's story was everywhere. News outlets ran with the leaked files. Social media exploded with discussions, debates, demands for accountability. The public was outraged. The government scrambled to contain the fallout. But there was no stopping it now. As Carter stood in front of the cameras, facing a nation hungry for the truth, he delivered his final words. We are only as strong as the trust between those who serve and those who lead. When that trust is broken, it is our duty, not as soldiers, but as citizens, to demand the truth. The broadcast ended, but the fight had just begun. Carter knew this was just the beginning. The people in power wouldn't go down without a fight. But he was ready, and so was the world. Like, comment, and subscribe. If you were on this journey with Colonel Carter, let us know in the comments. What would you have done in his place? Should the truth always come out, no matter the cost? Make sure to hit that like button if you believe in justice. Subscribe for more gripping stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Because sometimes, the truth is the most powerful weapon of all.